I'd like to shift gears now and talk about Messianic Judaism itself. For many of our listeners in Brazil, this might be a new concept. What is Messianic Judaism? And your experience can really help clarify what it's all about. So, what is a Messianic Jew? In what ways is it different from being a traditional Jew? And in what ways it is different from being a Gentile Christian?
Sure, sure. Yeah, well, the first of all, what I call the modern Messianic Jewish movement really started in the early 1970s. Before that, of course, the early believers, the early followers of Jesus, they were, of course, all Jews, but and all of his early disciples were Jews, and so you could say they were Messianic Jews. Of course, the term was not used back then. Then throughout the ages, throughout all of history, probably after about the second or third century, Jews still came to faith in Jesus throughout all of history, but they just essentially joined the church and they became Christians. So they, for all intents and purposes, they lost the Jewish identity, connection to the Jewish community, so on and so forth. And then after when the Jesus movement arose in the U.S. in the late 60s and early 70s, there were a lot of Jewish young people that came to faith in Jesus, including myself. And a lot of these people, though, were not satisfied with just joining traditional churches. They wanted to have more of a Jewish expression. And so essentially that's how the Messianic Jewish movement kind of got birthed, I'd say a little over 50 years ago, so that Messianic Jews are obviously different than what we call traditional Jews because we believe in Jesus as the Messiah. And so that makes a huge difference. And of course, historically, that would put us into the Christian camp and no longer in the Jewish camp. Messianic Jews would argue the contrary, that we remain Jews, just that our Judaism is now fulfilled or completed in Jesus. But that doesn't mean, for many of us, including myself, that doesn't mean that we just join a church and just follow all the Christian traditions and so on, but rather we maintain Jewish identity. So we keep all the festivals like Shabbat on Saturday, things like Passover, Shavuot or Pentecost, Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles, and all the other various holidays. And we keep, various Jewish traditions, trying to maintain some level of kosher and so on. So there's a lot to it. So basically, Messianic Jews are really, we could say you could argue, we could say that we are like the early followers of Jesus, the Jewish followers of Jesus, in that we still maintain our connection and our identification with the Jewish community, and consider ourselves Jews, but we believe in the fulfillment of that through Jesus the Messiah. So, and how that differs from what we call Gentile Christians is, I would just point most people to Acts chapter 15 in the New Testament, where the apostles lay down kind of a distinction between Gentile followers of Jesus and Jewish followers. At that time, Acts 15 probably occurred around the year 50 AD. So we're talking maybe, 18 to 20 years after Yeshua's death and resurrection. And so at this point, most of the believers were Jews, but primarily through the ministry of Paul, now Gentiles were coming in significant numbers. And the question is, what do you do with these Gentiles? Yeah. Today it's like, what do you do with these Jews? But back then it was, what do you do with these Gentiles who believe? And so there were many among the so-called Messianic Jews of that era that believed that they all needed to convert to Judaism. But the apostles ruled, no, they do not. And all they have to do is keep some basic laws. Technically, in Judaism, they're called the Noahide commandments, but it doesn't matter what they all are. But they're like minimal traditional laws that show that these Gentile Christians are not idolaters, but rather they now believe in the God of Israel and then the Messiah Jesus. And so today, when now we jump forward almost 2,000 years, and today now, of course, the vast majority of followers of Jesus around the world are not Jewish; they're Gentile followers. And so the question is, and it happens in a lot of places, does that mean that to be a true Christian, that you need to keep all the Jewish festivals, be like a Messianic Jew and all this stuff? The answer is no, because the apostles made it clear that there is a distinction. We're one in the body, we're one of the Messiah. And we're no better, Jews are no better than Jewish believers, are no better than Gentile believers. We're all the same. It's just that we have a different calling in our lives. And so that's a kind of a long answer to that question.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. It really helps to understand how faith in Jesus completes rather than replaces Jewish identity.